president to be convicted after he was found guilty on all 34 counts in his New York hush money trial. Trump was charged with falsifying business records to cover up payments made to an adult film star ahead of the 2016 presidential election. Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz's centrist party has proposed holding a parliamentary vote on dissolving Israel's parliament. The move follows an ultimatum that Mr. Gantz issued this month, demanding Mr. Netanyahu agree to a plan for post-war Gaza by the 8th of June. Our Ministry of External Affairs has highlighted India's historical support for Palestinian statehood and a two-state solution following the recent recognition of Palestine by Ireland, Norway and Spain. In the United States, economic growth slowed more sharply early this year than initially estimated as consumers eased up on spending amid rising prices and high interest rates. And so to America, where soon India and Pakistan and 18 other countries will be playing in the T20 World Cup. The US team captain Monank Patel, who will again take charge of leadership responsibilities this year, joins us on the World 24/7. Well, Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. Trump is also still the favorite to be the next president of the United States. But the former US president has been found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment to a porn star, making him the first former US president to become a convicted felon. The unanimous verdict from the 12-person jury ends a 6-week trial in which prosecutors accused Trump of orchestrating an illegal conspiracy to influence the 2016 presidential election. Now, Trump will have a criminal record as he seeks to become president again. Trump and his team, though, reacted quickly to the trial's outcome. In fact, he declared he's a political prisoner in a fundraising email that was sent just moments after the verdict, although he was not jailed, as you're well aware. It now falls to Justice Juan Merchan to determine Trump's sentence. The judge scheduled the sentencing for July 11th, just 4 days before the Republican National Convention is set to begin.
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here.
Well, what happens next? Well, Mitch McCann joins us live from New York at the moment for further clarity. Mitch, thanks so much for joining us on the World 24/7. Now, falsifying business records carries a maximum sentence of 4 years in prison. But because the crime is non-violent and Trump has no prior convictions, any prison time is far from guaranteed. What can one expect at this stage?
Well, most legal experts and scholars here in the United States who have been speaking about this issue say it's most likely that Donald Trump will actually get a fine for this. But Judge Merchan, as you say, can sentence him to probation or prison or anything he likes. Donald Trump could go to jail for up to 4 years as a result of this. But as I say, that's very unlikely. This trial lasted more than 6 weeks, about 6 weeks and 4 days. And in the last few hours, the United States citizens really were on the edge of their seats as they watched this unfold. Many people around the world from many countries like India watching this unfold as well, really gobsmacked that a United States former president could be convicted of crimes. Donald Trump now a convicted felon, today found guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records to cover up hush money payments to the porn star Stormy Daniels. And prosecutors always said throughout this trial it is more serious because Donald Trump did that, conducted this hush money scheme to influence the 2016 presidential election. Donald Trump has always denied this. You've just heard the clip from him there where he said this was a disgrace. It was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. He says the real verdict will be at that election on November 5. One really interesting point to note that in the last few hours we've found out that Donald Trump will be holding a press conference at Trump Tower in about 13 hours from now. We have no idea what Donald Trump is going to say, although we can guess it might be along the lines of what we've just heard, that he's very unhappy about this.
Well, we do look forward to what that press conference reveals. But as per legal experts, as Mitch is reporting, Trump is likely to get a fine for this. But Mitch, Trump is certain to appeal the verdict, right? A process that could likely take many months or many years. But is this likely to reap political benefits for Trump? In fact, we are seeing reports of Trump's fundraising site crashing after an influx of donors following this guilty verdict.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there's two really schools of thought about this. There are some people who think that it could destroy his campaign, and there are others that think it could really galvanise the right, that is the right on the political side, to really vote for Donald Trump. As you mentioned tonight, Donald Trump's fundraising website has broken down because so many people have been going to that website. There's been a poll conducted by the radio broadcaster NPR here in the United States about this exact issue. And what they found is that 60% of voters said they wouldn't change their mind, or they would not consider changing their mind based on a potential guilty verdict in this case. So it seems the majority won't be swayed, but Donald Trump may find some support here if his fundraising website is anything to go by.
Well, legal scholars seem to agree that Trump's New York felony conviction can't stop him from becoming president if the voters put him back in office. But the Constitution imposes very few prerequisites for the presidency. What is the path going ahead for Trump in the next few months ahead of the election?
Well, once he gets past the sentencing, depending on what that will be, the path will be clear for Donald Trump to campaign. Even though he's been convicted here, there is some good news for him, you could say. It means he's not stuck in a courtroom in the coming days and weeks. He can actually get out and campaign against Joe Biden. As you mentioned, there are very few requirements for someone running for office. You have to be over 35 years old. You have had to be born in the United States, and you have had to have lived here for the last 14 years. That's basically it. There is nothing that says if you have a conviction that you can't run for the presidency. So he will be able to run. And get this, if he was sentenced to jail, he could still be the president from behind bars. Now, we know that's unlikely, right, but that is possible.
Mitch, as always, thanks so much for joining us for the Ground Report. Meanwhile, we must mention Trump stands accused of additional wide-ranging criminal conduct in 3 other cases, 2 for subverting the 2020 election results and 1 for hoarding classified documents after he left office. But none of those cases appears likely to go on trial before Election Day in the United States. With that, let's turn our attention to the other big story we're tracking. Israeli War Cabinet member Benny Gantz has announced his centrist National Unity Party has introduced a bill to dissolve the Israeli parliament, which would trigger an early election. So what's next? Well, it's unclear when lawmakers might vote on the bill, which requires a majority vote to pass. Israeli law stipulates there cannot be another vote for 6 months if the motion fails. Right, for further clarity, joining us, VOA correspondent Ricky Rosen at the moment. Thanks so much, Ricky, for joining us on the World 24/7. We are aware that Benny Gantz is a long-term rival of Mr. Netanyahu, and he has increasingly been critical of Israel's military campaign in Gaza, saying that the government has deprioritized the safe return of the remaining hostages. But how significant of a blow is this bill to Netanyahu? How likely is this bill going to be passed?
I think it's very unlikely that the bill to dissolve the Knesset, the parliament, and call for new elections will pass, because the government coalition includes 64 out of 120 politicians from the parliament. And so they have a majority, even a slim majority, will defeat this bill to dissolve the government and call for new elections. There were 3 similar bills that were proposed 2 weeks ago, and they all lost.
But if Israel goes to polls today, Who's likely to win? Is Netanyahu likely to garner enough votes to form a coalition this time around?
Until recently, Gantz was leading Netanyahu by a very wide margin. And he had wide support from the public and from other politicians in the opposition. They did a poll just yesterday that showed that for the first time he is losing to Netanyahu. But it doesn't necessarily mean that Netanyahu would be able to continue being prime minister, because in the Israeli system, the prime minister rules with a coalition. And they say that even though Gantz has declined in popularity and Netanyahu has risen in popularity, Netanyahu would still not have enough votes to form a coalition this time if there were elections. The problem is that Gantz might also not have enough votes to form a coalition, because he would be dependent on getting votes from both the left and the right. And the only thing that would tie his government together would be the opposition to Netanyahu.
Well, so far, Mr. Netanyahu seems averse to bringing up the idea of ending the war in Gaza. But are the cracks deepening as far as the war cabinet there is concerned?
Definitely. About 2 weeks ago, Gantz said that he was giving Netanyahu an ultimatum of 3 weeks until June 8th, next week, in which to come up with a plan for what they call the day after the war against Hamas in Gaza finishes. Netanyahu will not even bring up the idea in his cabinet because he knows that the minute that he starts talking about ending the war and the day after, the far right members of his coalition will bring down the government. And then he will not have enough votes to avoid going to elections. It would be a crisis that he will not take that chance to do. So he has never even brought up the idea of the day after. And Gantz is saying that he will leave the war cabinet if this issue is not resolved. But he can leave and Netanyahu will still have a majority of votes.
Well, Ricky, thanks so much, as always, for joining us with the latest on the Israel-Gaza war. Meanwhile, India has reaffirmed its long-standing position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict following the recent recognition of Palestine by Ireland, Norway and Spain. The Ministry of External Affairs spokesperson Randhir Jaiswal highlighted India's historical support for Palestinian statehood and a two-state solution. India also expressed deep concern over the recent loss of civilian lives in the displacement camp in Rafah. Listen in.
You know, India recognized Palestine way back in the 1980s. It has been a long-standing position that we support two-state solution, which entails the establishment of a sovereign, viable and independent state of Palestine within recognized and mutually agreed borders, living side by side with Israel in peace. The heartbreaking loss of civilian lives in the displacement camp in Rafah is a matter of deep concern for us. We have consistently called for protection of civilian population and respect for international humanitarian law in the ongoing conflict. We also note that the Israeli side has already accepted responsibility for it as a tragic incident and announced an investigation into the incident.
With that, let's turn our attention now to the United States, where economic growth slowed more sharply early this year than initially estimated, as consumers eased up on spending amid rising prices and high interest rates. US GDP, adjusted for inflation, grew at a 1.3% annual rate in the first 3 months of the year. This is what the Commerce Department there has said. That was down from 3.4% in the final quarter of 2023 and below the 1.6% growth rate that was reported last month in the government's preliminary first quarter estimate. For the first time, 16 and 17-year-olds will vote for their representatives in the European Parliament, following the model of Austria, Greece and Malta.
It's very important to remember that when you're 16, when you're 17, you oftentimes have the right to make medical decisions for your own body. You have the obligation to pay taxes if you have a job. You can enter civil partnerships or you can get married. So you have all of these duties, all of these obligations. So part of our advocacy efforts and what we're asking for is for the democratic rights of young people to match their responsibilities. We think it's only fair, and we see interest, we see the willingness to be involved.
After several interpretations, the Belgian Constitutional Court ruled that young Belgians would be subjected to compulsory voting as adults, even if the federal government decided that voters aged 16 and 17 would not be fined for not showing up. From 6th to 9th June, around 400 million European citizens in 27 member states will exercise their right to vote for their representatives in the European Parliament, the world's only directly elected transnational assembly. Some though see the lowering of the minimum age as a ploy to get an easy vote of unwitting teens who have barely outgrown childhood and are prey to whatever the flavor of the day for a new generation might be. Experts warn that left-wing, right-wing or populists could profit. If the United States has a limit of 25 years to be a candidate for Congress, most EU nations allow anyone 18 years or up to represent their electorate in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, France and Brussels. And doesn't Kira Marie Peter Hansen know? Out of the blue, she was shocked when she found herself elected on a Danish Green ticket 5 years ago, barely 20.
Well, of course, the first half year was super difficult and confusing because I didn't expect to get elected, so I had to start all over in a Brussels life also. But I think overall the European Parliament is a good place to be a young politician. Like my group is very supportive, and also in the negotiations I've had, I don't feel like people are seeing me as just this young person who knows nothing.
Manon Aubry of the hard left France Unbowed said there were many issues for the young to get riled up about, from social exclusion and inequality to poverty.
It's the only time, the only place when you, me, any youth has as much power as Viktor Orban, as Emmanuel Macron, as Bernard Arnault, one of the richest guy in the European Union.
Across the continent, millions more young people will vote for the first time. 5.1 million in Germany, 4 million in France and 2.8 million in Italy. This is according to the EU statistics agency Eurostat. While no one can give a precise total of youth voters, if first-time voters were a bloc, they would be larger than most EU countries. Parmeshwar Bava for NDTV.